Today we will be taking a look at some cards that I would love to see return for the new upcoming set, Winds of Exchange. With houses Brobnar and Mars making their grand reappearance, I figured I would focus mainly on those two houses. I've got 5 Brobnar cards and 5 Mars cards to look at, along with a couple miscellaneous ones that I think could fit into the set in some interesting ways. Let's start with House Mars, the fan favorite finally returning to the game. First is an interesting one, a Coda exclusive, Psychic Network. In today's more board-based KeyForge gameplay, I think Psychic Network would make an interesting addition, and especially with House Shadows being rotated out for Winds of Exchange, the sort of Ember control Shadows originally provided may need to show up elsewhere. And also, with Unfathomable being a house Mars could potentially encounter across from them, Unfathomable could exhaust your entire Mars board presence, rendering Psychic Network useless. I think Psychic Network could interact with the set in some neat ways, which is why I chose it as my first Mars card. Next is Aether Spider, one of my favorite cards in the game. The sheer disruption Aether Spider provides is incredible, literally making it so the opponent's pool will never see any Ember until Aether Spider is dealt with. And at 7 power, it's not all that easy to deal with. Sure, it doesn't deal any damage when fighting, but that's still a lot of Spider to work through. I truly do hope we get to see Aether Spider again. We haven't seen it since Call of the Archons, and it's always a joy to find when opening a deck. Next up is Collector Worm. Collector Worm from Age of Ascension is one of my favorite creatures because he's so unique in the way he interacts with the creatures he fights, and he's one of only 4 creatures in the game with 5 armor. He can archive creatures big and small, he can archive elusive creatures, he can even archive warded creatures as long as he pops the ward with the fight. And perhaps in Winds of Exchange, there will be a card that allows you to make a token creature from the cards in your archives, as opposed to the top of your deck like you usually do. Imagine archiving an opponent's creature with Collector Worm, then making a token creature out of it on your side of the board. Next is Nizhik Resonator. In an era where key cost increase is a prevalent method of stopping and taxing keys, and in a set where Shadows no longer exists, Nizhik Resonator could be an important tool for Mars to have. With 2 neighbors, Resonator makes keys cost 10 for your opponent, making it a must-answer threat. He was a great card to have in Age of Ascension, and I'm sure he would be in Winds of Exchange as well. The last Mars card for today is the action Deep Probe. Played with good timing, Deep Probe is an absolute killer. If you notice the opponent hasn't called a certain house in quite a while, or a specific house in their deck has more creatures than the other 2, a well-played Deep Probe can be absolutely devastating to their game plan, and can utterly cripple their next turn. Not only that, but you also get to see your opponent's hand, which is super insightful and advantageous. Deep Probe could be an interesting addition to Winds of Exchange, perhaps removing creatures from the opponent's hand that they may have been planning to make into token creatures, using a card like Space Invaders. Moving on to House Brobnar. The first card from them I want to see return is Loot the Bodies. This card is just such a classic, and it was a critical part of what made Brobnar so good back in Call of the Archons. It gave Brobnar a unique sort of burst that fit in so well with the house thematically, and comboed insanely well with much of the Coda Brobnar kit, such as Gauntlet of Command, Anger, War Song, Follow the Leader, and perhaps best of all, Coward's End. Loot the Bodies never made it past the first set, and while I would love to see Brobnar's identity revamped in some cool new ways, it would be great for some of that classic burst to exist in it as well. Secondly, we have Mugwump. Mugwump was truly a threat to be reckoned with, showing up in all 3 sets where Brobnar was present, and if you didn't have the tools in your deck to counter a self-healing creature with continuously increasing power, then you could be in trouble. For me, Mugwump always encapsulated the sort of fighting power I like to see in Brobnar, huge creatures that are very difficult to take off the board and can do some real damage. Mugwump can tank fight after fight and suffer no consequences from it. The same definitely cannot be said for a number of the other creatures in Brobnar's later incarnations. Next is Rock Hurling Giant. Rock Hurling Giant is a remarkably versatile card, and once again possesses the damage output I like to see from Brobnar. In Worlds Collide in particular, being able to discard that other Brobnar trash from your hand and be rewarded for it was hugely advantageous. 4 whole damage is enough to remove a lot of creatures from the board, and doing so multiple times in a turn for discarding cards that wouldn't have given you any benefits otherwise is an incredible effect to have at your disposal. And at 6 power, he fits in perfectly with the ranks of Brobnar's Giants. The 4th Brobnar card I'd like to see return is Blood of Titans. It's always so satisfying to throw Blood of Titans on a creature like Lolith the Titanic, then flex it for 8 Ember, or even to throw it on creatures from other houses that aren't quite so powerful. One of my favorite decks has 9 artifacts and a Carlo Phantom, and if Carlo survives long enough for me to put Blood of Titans on him, I now have a 6 power elusive creature that lets me steal an Ember every time I play one of those 9 artifacts. And that's just one example of a great place to put Blood of Titans. 5 whole extra power is not something to scoff at. And we don't know this for sure yet, but if you're allowed to put upgrades on token creatures in Winds of Exchange, imagine having a 6 power Scientist token creature. The last Brobnar card I'd like to see is Smith, a classic action from, once again, all 3 sets with Brobnar. With the Ember Pip, even if you don't have more creatures than the opponent, there's still a little value in it. But if you do have more creatures, that's a whole half a key, rewarding you for being ahead on board. And with the more board-centered gameplay we've seen in KeyForge recently, I think this would be the perfect reprint to further reinforce the importance of the board. There are a couple miscellaneous cards that I wanted to bring up that I think would be cool reprints for Winds of Exchange. From House Unfathomable, we have Brain Drain, a classic action from Dark Tidings. Brain Drain is a phenomenal card to begin with, allowing you to not only see your opponent's hand like with Deep Probe, but to also put a potentially important card from that hand back on top of their deck. Brain Drain has a variety of uses, but in Winds of Exchange there's possibly the idea that you could put an important card from their hand back on top of their deck that may end up being made into a token creature instead of being used for its intended purpose. So if that card really is super important to the opponent's game plan, they may want to delay making a token creature in order to draw that card into their hand again, to avoid it being used as a token creature. I think Brain Drain could make some very interesting decision spaces in the next set. The very last card for today is a simple one from House Sanctum, Proclamation 346E. I chose this one for pretty much the same reason as Nizhik Resonator, for its key cost increase effect. It's a pretty brutal artifact. It was in Age of Ascension, and I'd imagine it would be in Winds of Exchange as well. With Shadows gone, key cost increase and taxing will undoubtedly be more important than ever, and Proc is a very strong example of that. Once again, a very board-based card, and with KeyForge heading more and more in that direction, Proc would be a wonderful addition in my opinion. But those are just a few cards that I would love to see return for Winds of Exchange. Let me know in the comments what cards you'd like to see return for Winds of Exchange, and how they may interact with the set and its new mechanics. Thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you all again in the next one. See you later.